It is December the 7th, 1995. My name is Stephen Lebowski, and today I'm interviewing Mr. Aaron Jacoby in Woodmere, New York. The interview will take place in English. Today is December the 7th, 1995. My name is Stephen Lebowski, and I'm interviewing Mr. Aaron Jacoby in Woodmere, New York. The interview will take place in English. Hi. Could you tell me your name?
My name is Aaron Jacoby.
And Mr. Jacoby, where were you born?
I was born in a small town in the Carpathian Mountains. It was called Val Rakovec, which was, the meaning of it is large Rakovec. However, it wasn't that large. They also had a smaller suburb for smaller Rakovec. That's why I called it Val Rakovec.
Could you just spell Rakovec for me?
Okay, Rakovec.
And was Jacoby your family name at that time?
No, it was Jakubowicz.
Could you spell that for me?
Jakubovic.
And just tell me, if you can, where Rakovec is in relationship to a major town that is perhaps more common, major city, Krakow.
Well, no, it was not. It was major city. It was near Chust, probably would be one of the major cities. Mm-hmm. And that's where Elie Wiesel comes from. Uh-huh. So it was, how close it was, I really don't know, because I actually don't remember that much. I was pretty young when I left that area. Mm-hmm. I was born in 1929, January 24th, 1929. And to a couple, I was the fifth child in the family.
Were you the eldest or the youngest?
No, I was the fifth.
Not the eldest, obviously.
The fifth.
Was that the youngest?
No, we had six, fifth of six children. Mm-hmm. And my oldest brother was born in 1920. And then I had three sisters, born 22, 23, and 25. And I was 29, and my youngest brother was 30, born in 1931.
So you were all fairly close in age?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Could you tell me your brothers and sisters' names?
Yes, my oldest brother was Moses, sister Gloria, Frida, Elsie, and youngest brother was Meyer.
Right. Uh-huh. And tell me a little bit about your parents. What did your father do for a living?
Okay, my father, from I can remember, did a lot of trading and sometimes cattle trading. Shoes that he was involved in also. Which way, I don't know. I spent most of my time in school. In Europe, they had a habit of sending children to school just like they do here now, from the ages of 3. And I remember starting going to school at the age of 3. And most of the day, we attended of course, religious school and secular school. Mornings we used to go to, first to religious school, then secular, then back to religious school in the afternoon. Mm-hmm. It's like a full-time job from 7 in the morning until probably 6 in the evening.
Mm-hmm. And did your mother work?
No, my mother was at home. She was not, she did not do any kind of work.
Uh-huh. As a little boy, could you describe as best you can the relationship that you had with your parents?
Well, as a little boy, I had a wonderful relationship with my parents. My father wasn't home that often, but because he did some traveling. However, my mother was always looking after us and preparing foods, preparing lunches to take along, and sandwiches, and just looked after us as best as she could.
Were your parents strict?
Sometimes. My father was pretty strict. But
it was a pretty nice...
It was nice to live.
Nice
until, of course, things got very tough.
Right, right. Did you have a special relationship with any one of your siblings?
Well, I had a special relationship with my oldest brother. He was just always wanted to accomplish many, many things. I'm a lot like him. He was very good in school. He also went to yeshiva, and he also graduated gymnasium, which was probably similar to college in the United States. And in 1940, he was assistant to the town supervisor in town until 1942 or 43, when they took him to a labor camp where I believe he perished within a year. He was shot there. And
Did you grow up in an observant household?
yes.
What are your recollections of the Chagim, the festivals that you like to share with us? Or anything special about growing up?
In a town like Rakovich, the whole family lived within walking distance. And on holidays, we would most of the time get together and just spend the holidays together. Mm-hmm. Kids used to play, and a lot of cousins and uncles. Did
you have grandparents?
Yes.
And they lived with?
They lived within walking distance from our house. As a matter of fact...
Do you remember them?
I remember them. I mean, as much as I can remember. Mm-hmm. My grandfathers both perished just about a year before the Holocaust, before we were taken away. Both of my grandmothers went to Auschwitz.
Mm-hmm. So the family on all the festivals got together?
Absolutely. We used to have meals together. Mm-hmm. As a matter of fact, my house, our house, used to be the house where they gathered most of the time. Mm-hmm. My mother was a great hostess. Mm-hmm. And my mother had a couple of brothers and sisters that were living there also. Mm-hmm. And just before I go further, my grandmother had 14 children, so there was a lot of siblings. Although a lot of them I never knew, because before I was born, a lot of them went to the United States and remained in the United States. But we still had a lot of family where we used to get together, and our house used to be the one that I used to gather in most of the time. There's another reason also. As a kid, I was always very sick. I had asthma, and they used to come always. I was supposed to visit me and see me, so that it was the gathering place.
Mm-hmm. What do you remember about the town itself?
The town itself was, I would say, like a small suburban town in the United States. It had one main street with shopping. It had, of course, it wasn't as modern as the towns in the United States, but it was a nice, comfortable town. We had two shuls, one large and one smaller one. We had about approximately 200 Jewish families living there. Mm-hmm. The rest of it was non-Jews. And
did the Jewish population represent a sizable percentage of the town's people, or was
not really? It was a small percentage. Mm-hmm. And in the Carpathians, of course, the Goyim were not that friendly. They were anti-Semites quite a bit. Mm-hmm. But we were, at least since I can remember, we're part of Czechoslovakia. It was the Carpathian Mountains where it belonged to Czechoslovakia. And we had a choice of going to Ukrainian school or Czech school. Most of the Jews went to the Czech school, and the Gentiles went to the Ukrainian school. So it was like a separation between the Jews and the non-Jews.
From the perspective of a young boy, what do you recall about Jewish life? Did you belong yourself to any youth movement or anything of that sort?
I myself did not. I was all of 10, 11. By the time I left, I was 14 years old, so it's not really, did not get a chance to belong to any kind of movement. always busy with school and learning.
But for example, on a Shabbat afternoon, what would you do?
Shabbat afternoon, of course, after Shabbat, after the services and the lunch meal, and probably a little nap, we would get together in the shul with the teachers of our teachers, and the parents used to come over and just listen to certain questions that the students and the teachers were teaching the students. They were like having a showing off as to what the kids are learning.
Right.
And that was pretty much quite often that they used to do that.
How many synagogues were there?
Two.
Two. And one, which one did you go to?
We went to, there was one larger one, the main shul, and there was like a best medrash like they have here. Yeah. We went to the larger one.
Like a shtibel, a smaller one.
Yeah, but they were right next to each other, not far apart.
And do you remember the rabbi there?
We had, yeah, a rabbi. He was a Polish person. He was the only one in that community that was dressed like a rabbi with a shtreimel and the long coat. Yeah. And he's also, then we had a shochet also from Poland also who was there. Those are the two people that were the leaders of the community.
So there wasn't really a Hasidic component?
No, it was not Hasidic, no.
Was there any one teacher that you remember as a boy who stands out in your mind as having had particular influence on you or taught you anything that you remember?
I remember several teachers. I mean, both in secular and in the religious. There was one in the religious. He was an older man named Shalom Friedman. I remember his name, and he used to make me feel extremely good because I was very good in school. As a matter of fact, I was always with older students. I would skip classes. As a matter of fact, later on, you'll find out that possibly saved my life. So he used to give me a lot of confidence. You can do this and you can do that, and I sure could. Although I stayed out a lot being sick, I was able to keep up with the older students. And of course, in secular, the same way. I remember a lady, she was from Czechoslovakia. She used to send home homework to me to make sure that I should keep up with the class, and it was nice.
You mentioned before that the non-Jews in the town where you were born and where you grew up, there was an anti-Semitic element. Did that ever manifest itself in your experience? Did you ever experience anti-Semitism?
Well, I did not per se personally experience it. However, it was like when you walked the streets, you were afraid to. You saw non-Jewish kids walking or coming towards it. We'd go a different way.
Right. So you could feel it.
You felt it.
Right. What about your parents? Did your father ever not?
Well,
perhaps you don't know. In business, do you know?
I don't know. I wouldn't know about that. Although I used to see neighbors coming in, non-Jewish neighbors, into the house and talk to my parents.
What's the earliest recollection you have of the rise to power of the Nazis in Germany?
The earliest recollection I would have would be in 1939 when Hungary invaded our area, and all the Czechs left and became part of Hungary. That's when things started rolling. They would harass Jewish people. Every Jew had to put on a yellow star on his clothing. As a kid, I thought it was, at first I thought it was something of a show thing to put on your lapel, a yellow star. But then subsequently, it didn't take long. I found out that when you wore that, you had a very good chance of being beaten up by anybody on the street.
Right. So you were 10 years old when the war broke out.
Mm-hmm.
Were the Hungarians puppets of the Nazis, or
well, we haven't seen any Nazis at that time, so apparently they were the puppets of the Nazis. They're the ones that eventually turned us over to the Nazis.
Mm-hmm. Did your home life change once Hungarians took over parts of the city?
Oh, absolutely.
Can you tell me a little bit about that?
It was starting. My father couldn't travel anymore. He started taking things away from the Jewish people. Whatever you owned, they started confiscating it.
Who's they? The Hungarians?
Hungarians, yeah.
What were they called? Was there a special name, like a gendarme or?
Yeah.
Right.
Whatever. I mean, the little bit I can remember, I'm sure there was more going on than what I have seen.
Mm-hmm.
But things had gotten tough. Food became shortage of food. Couldn't get any food. Milk they would take if any Jews owned any cows or anything like that, they would take it away from them.
Mm-hmm. Were Jews kicked out of their houses and forced to move?
Some were kicked out of their houses, forced to move in with somebody else.
Uh-huh.
And it was, they took, like, after I started taking most of the young people, able-bodied people, and sent them to work. There's no teachers left anymore.
Mm-hmm. So what, as far as schooling was concerned, that stopped?
Mostly it stopped. As a matter of fact, by then, I know there were some younger kids, and I was appointed at one time to teach a certain amount of children younger than I.
Mm-hmm.
So for about 8-9 months, I remember teaching like 20 children, things that I knew already at that time. And I must have known quite a bit because it still remained with me. I still know quite a bit of learning today, although I went back to school a little bit after the war. But
this was secular studies or Jewish studies?
Jewish studies.
Mm-hmm.
So it was, studies became very scarce and unavailable.
Right.
Kids did not have any place where to go.
Right. So under this occupation, it started when?
1939.
When exactly in 1939? Do you remember?
I don't remember exactly the month.
Mm-hmm. It would have been probably the latter part of the year.
Possible.
Uh-huh. So normal life came to a halt.
There was no normal life anymore.
Do you recall how you occupied yourself during the day without school? Were you able to go out on the street without?
We did. We lived in a sort of outside of the downtown area, so we had a garden and a private area there where we could play outside. And it was just hiding. As soon as, I remember my parents used to call us right into the house. If they saw something, we didn't know what was going on. But whatever they saw, we had to all of a sudden run into the house. Mm-hmm. There was all kinds of pogroms going on.
Did a pogrom take place in your city, in your village?
It did. As a matter of fact, not long after that, they started looking for people that were not natives of the area. So the two people that we had, which was the rabbi and the shofet, they took them away and sent them to Poland, probably to their deaths. And almost immediately after that, probably in 1940. And it just, life was not the same. I mean, you were always scared.
Did you actually felt fear as a little boy?
As a little, of course. I mean, just by watching the faces of my parents, and because I had older brothers and sisters.
Right. Did they tell you? Did they tell you what was going on? If perhaps your parents didn't tell you so much.
I have a feeling that people did not believe what was going on, even if they knew something. They just didn't believe this was happening, because even later on, as I got at the age of 13, 14, when they started already removing us from our homes, I don't believe that my parents really knew or believed that these things are really going on.
But you described your elder brother Moshe as being very bright. Did he have a sense of...
Unfortunately, he was taken away in 1942,
Right.
and he has never returned since then. I'm sure he had a sense.
Right, but that was already, 3 years after
Yeah.
after the occupation.
I'm sure. Well, he was busy until then. He was like still the one that was looked up to in town because he was the assistant. So he did get certain privileges at that time, and possibly my parents may have gotten some privileges also because of him. So, but whether he knew, I mean, it's such a difficult situation. I really don't know.
Hard to say. Do you remember hunger at all? Did you experience hunger or?
Hunger per se, probably not. It's just not the things that I wanted to eat. In other words, we did not have much of a choice.
Was
Bread,
food was rationed?
food, yes, they had. They did have certain things. I remember correctly. They had coupons to get certain things like eggs, milk. Although milk, for a while there, we had our own because we had a cow. But meat you couldn't get. There was no more kosher meat available. Bread and milk, I suppose that was still available. Cottage cheese, which they made themselves. And but I don't think anybody was thinking of food at that time. I don't remember thinking much of food until later on.
Right. Was there anything bad in the early days, immediately after the occupation, that you can remember happening to close family friends, friends of your own?
Well, things have been happening constantly. Of course, we as children were probably shielded from a lot of it because every once in a while you'd hear this guy was caught and murdered in the street. Somebody else was grabbed and disappeared, never showed up again. Whether the Hungarians did it or the Ukrainians did it, at least I did not know, but you would hear sort of in a quiet way people would say, oh, this particular person disappeared. Or many, many other things that probably went on. And this was going on until, of course, 1944, when we finally were all put together and into a shul where they grabbed everybody and pushed everybody in, 200 families, sort of, whatever it was, into one building for a couple of days.
Right. So from 1939 until 1944, it's the better part of 5 years.
4 years.
4 years. You continued to live under a pseudo-Hungarian
Right.
Nazi type of occupation.
Correct.
The situation didn't get better.
It got progressively worse.
It got progressively worse.
I remember when my grandfathers died in 1943, like one month after the other. One died 1 month. I believe it was March and April. I remember my father saying they're better off than we are. That's because they had a burial, decent burial. So I guess they did know that things were getting progressively worse.
Had you heard? I mean, 4 years is a long time. 4 years is a very long time to be living under that type of duress, and as well, it could be said even that you were fortunate in that you were not displaced. You were not taken.
We were not, yes.
From one place to another, to a camp. Did you know that camps existed?
I didn't.
You yourself did not know. Did your parents know?
Possibly. Well, let me put it this, in that area in Carpathian there, I don't think that they had camps where they put people together until 1944. It was just being weeded out by certain people, by taking certain people away. Young people into labor camps and foreigners to their country, wherever they're supposed to go. But as far as having a camp where they put people all in one particular camp, I don't believe they had it, at least as far as I know.
Was there any attempt to form a ghetto in the city where you lived?
No, they finally formed a ghetto about 60 kilometers from us, which is in Munkach.
Ah, okay.
That's where we finally wound up.
When did you go to Munkach?
In 1944.
So after you were all...
April of 1944.
So after the incident where you were all herded into the synagogue, you were...
Right, and they herded in there for a couple of days.
Right.
And that's where we started feeling no food no more. There was no food there no more.
But prior to that, in 1943, you had told me that your brother, your eldest brother, was taken away.
Yes, so he was taken into a labor camp, which was supposedly, he was working on the front lines, but they were digging ditches, the Jewish boys, for the army. I think it was in the Romania area, where he was taken to. It was like they said originally it was like they were called into the army, but it was like a Jewish army instead of the regular army. They did not carry any weapons. They just did the work that was necessary to be done for the army.
He was forcibly taken?
Yes.
Do you remember the day he was taken?
I don't remember exactly. He had to report. It was not actually forcibly. It was like being called into the army.
Right.
He had to report.
And did you ever see him? Did you ever see him again? So the day he was asked to report, from that day on.
That day he never came back, because I was subsequently found out after the war that within a year he was shot on the job because he got so weak he couldn't continue working, so they just shot him.
How did this manifest itself with your parents?
Well, they didn't know about it. I mean,
but knowing that he'd been taken away.
Well, it was an awful situation.
How did it make you feel?
Me made feel even worse because I was very close to him.
Right. So in the 4 years under the Hungarian occupation, life got progressively worse in terms of living standards, but you were still able to live in your home. As
a young boy, 10, 11, 12 years old, probably did not feel it as much as the older people who were probably found at least they were the ones that were protecting the children. They must have been protecting us from seeing the things. They're the ones that went out mostly to get things, to organize for things, and maybe bring food home, where I did not do those things. So I found myself, I was probably in the best position, with the exception that I was always the sick kid in the house, always with asthma attacks and not being able to breathe, especially in the wintertime.
Were you on medication?
Whatever medication was available there. As a matter of fact, when we were taking to that synagogue, when they took us all away, I was in bed at the time. I was taken out with 102 temperature. And we always talk about that I was the sick one. My other two brothers were healthy, and I remained alive, and they perished.
How much younger was your younger brother?
A year and a half.
Yeah. Okay. Tape number 2. Okay. Let's move forward to the day that you were taken from your home by the authorities, when the community was uplifted and taken to the synagogue. What do you remember? You had told us that you were sick. You had a fever. Is there anything that you recall from that day?
Yes, I remember the Hungarian police, or whatever they call them. I remember those feathers sticking out of their hats. That's their uniform. That was their uniform. came into the house with bayonets and asked everybody to get out of the house, just take one little valise with them, and get out of the house. My mother started crying. My father, a sick kid in the house. So they called a neighbor with a wagon, a horse and wagon, and they put me in a horse and wagon, and the rest of them started walking out, and they drove me to the synagogue.
Mm-hmm. Did your family have any advance warning?
No, not as far as I know.
Right.
It was done at the spur of the moment.
Was this in the morning?
It was, sort of mid-morning.
Right. And they just came in?
Came in, probably half a dozen police, surrounded the house and out.
Wow.
And of course, as we were going, we saw everybody else. The whole Jewish community was on their way, and by the evening, everybody was there. In one place, possibly 500-600 people.
About 200 families, you said.
Well,
Right.
I would assume that between parents, children,
Right.
must have been at least 500-600 people there.
You were in the main shul?
In the main shul.
Uh-huh.
And it was crying, sobbing, screaming. For 2 days that was going on.
What does this was in 1944?
Around April. I think it was April 1944.
Right. Had you, prior to this, had a bar mitzvah?
Yes, I had a bar mitzvah in 1943. Well, whatever the bar mitzvah was. I'm sorry. I was born on January 29th, so 1943.
Right.
Of course, there was no bar mitzvahs except I got an aliyah, and I said the master. There was no parties those days, and I remember correctly. We served a bottle of schnapps with some cookies, a homemade cake.
Yeah.
That was my bar mitzvah. It was not much of a celebration.
Different from today. What do you remember about the 2 days in the synagogue?
2 days in the synagogue was something that you can never forget because it was nothing but cries and sobs, and even people amongst themselves started fighting because there was no room. So it was like a Holocaust by itself. I mean, in those days we didn't know what a Holocaust was, but it was tough.
So you were all sitting on the pews, on the floor?
All over the place, floors, pews, outdoors. After the first day, the sanitary conditions weren't that good either no more. It was children, it was older people.
Now the rabbi of the community had already been taken away.
Had been taken away. There was no more. The leadership was very poor at that point already.
Was there anybody there who assumed the role of a leader?
Yes, there was, but you can't lead a situation like that. I don't think there was any kind of leadership at that point. The leadership was taken over by I guess the local militia and the Hungarian police.
Right.
And it was a rough 2 days. As a matter of fact, after the 2 days, when they told us we would be moving out of there, it was a relief to a certain extent. But then they told us that we'd have to walk from there 60-some-odd kilometers to Mukachev or whatever they called it those days. It was an impossibility.
Right.
But we started walking anyway.
What month of the year was this?
That was in probably the end of April or early May.
So it wouldn't have been that cold?
No, it wasn't that cold. But that area, April, was pretty cold the other night.
Because you're in the mountains?
Yeah, it was pretty cold at night.
Right.
But,
so you were told after 2 days that you were going to be relocated to Munkach, 60 miles, 60 kilometers away?
60, 70 kilometers, something like that.
About 45 miles. How did you get from the synagogue to Munkac?
Okay. It's because we started walking, but of course people were falling behind, falling apart. The local Gentile community got together, and they brought horse and wagons, and they volunteered to drive us there after a few hours. And that's how we got there finally.
So when you say drove, on a horse and buggy? Or?
Horse and wagons, they had those
Right.
wagons. And they put everybody in the wagons, and they drove the people to Munkac.
Uh-huh.
And that took a couple of days.
Was there anybody that you knew who didn't make it?
I don't remember anybody not making it there.
Right.
And a couple of days later, of course, we arrived in that ghetto there in Munkac that was prepared. There was a lot of people there already. We weren't the first ones to get there.
Mm. Where did you go when you got there?
It was surrounded houses. It was like a maybe a couple of mile area that was barbed wire around it. Had some houses on the ground. People lived on the ground. Some had some houses, and it was like a camp setup.
Mm-hmm. Was Munkac actually in Czechoslovakia? Or
Yes, it was also Czechoslovakia.
It was also Czechoslovakia. Uh-huh.
That was a pretty large city already.
Right.
As a matter of fact, Munkac, as I remember, my older brother went to school there, to the Munkac Rebbe's yeshiva.
Mm-hmm.
I was at that time probably 8, 9 years old when that happened, but I do remember him going there.
Mm-hmm. But the ghetto itself was not walled off.
It was barbed.
It was barbed wire.
Barbed wire.
Uh-huh. Did you have any close friends besides your family who you had a particularly strong relationship with? You know, just a boyhood friend who was with you, who you were able to talk with, and
of course I had. As a matter of fact, a lot of my friends I went to school with were along with me, and some of them went through the war with.
Right. And along the journey to Munkac, did any of you talk about what was going to happen, what had happened? I know you were sick.
I was sick at that time, so I really did not, pretty much sleeping for myself. Was in a daze, didn't know what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
Just wondering what next thing, what will happen next.
Mm-hmm. Whose responsibility was it to look after you? Your mother? She looked after you?
Yeah. Well, most of my sisters, my brother, the younger brother, they all took turns. I guess I remember all being around me, trying to help out.
Right. So where did you go? Did you have a house to go to or a room to go to when you got to Munkac?
No, we were given like a corner, if I remember correctly, and it was like a hallway maybe between two houses, a walkway. I remember, and at times I think we were able to go into the house also, but it was nothing really that you can live in. It was hell.
Just some space on the floor.
Whenever you got space, and if you didn't get thrown out of there, you were lucky also,
right.
Because there were people there that were there before, and they organized. Whoever organized better.
Right. Do you know if your parents were able to take any jewelry or money with them?
They might have taken jewelry, because I know I had on my suspenders sewn in some watches and some jewelry, and I know in Auschwitz it was taken away from me.
The suspenders were?
Yeah.
Right.
No, the suspenders were left, but then somebody touched and found something, and they took it away. The only thing that they left you with in Auschwitz was with the suspenders and shoes.
Right.
Everything else was taken away.
Uh-huh.
So they did have, I'm sure they did. How much, I don't know.
Right.
And I didn't know myself about the stuff that was in the suspenders until I subsequently found it.
Right. Were you able to determine from your parents that you were in a lot of danger? Did you see the fear on their faces?
Of course, how much of a danger? I couldn't say how much I felt it, but of course you saw it. I mean, you didn't have to see it in their faces. I mean, we were in danger right there. In Mukach already, you've seen more brutality. There you've seen already people being beat up, just any place. Mm-hmm. I remember my father had a little beard, and as soon as he got to Mukach, I don't remember, it was it probably was one of the Hungarian guards that took out a scissor and just cut his beard off. He had to sit down there and let himself be done, let himself be not shaved, but cut with a scissor. And they were just doing just about anything to hurt people. Mm-hmm.
Were you able to were you mobile yourself?
The funniest part is that as soon as I got there, I started feeling better. And to the point where by the time I got to Auschwitz, my asthma was gone. And I had no asthma attacks until 1988. And I got it, came back in 1988, the asthma came back. I had lost my asthma from 1944 until 1988.
Why do you think that?
Well, they say you cannot grow it. Maybe I don't know whether change of air, change of environment, somebody up there, I don't know. Sorry.
So
I don't know, but after I left, when I came into Mukach, I sort of became healthy.
How long after you got there?
Within a few days.
A few days.
And I had no pain. I had no temperature. I had no wheezing or coughing.
What was the daily routine, the plan of action while you were there?
We were there approximately 2 weeks. And there was no plan of action. It was just a matter of, you remember, my mother used to sometimes organize some food, or they had to stand in a line or get something. Whatever it was, it wasn't much. There wasn't even enough water available, clean water, drinking water. But it was only 2 weeks. And after 2 weeks, they started sending transports out to Auschwitz, because we didn't know. I didn't know where the transport were going. Right. But they used to pull up there with the freight cars, cattle cars, you know, and they used to take X amount of people and shove them into those cattle cars and to take them away. Right. We were, I believe, on the second transport left.
This is after 2 weeks?
After 2 weeks.
Right. Was there any discussion amongst your family, amongst friends of your family, to try and escape? Was that a viable option that you remember?
I've never heard it discussed, no. Why? Well, like I said before, I don't believe that they understood what was happening to the full extent, because there was no resistance whatsoever. Mm. At least as far as I can remember. There's nothing like, at least in Poland, there was the uprisings, which of course I heard of since then. I didn't know anything about it. But I haven't seen any kind of resistance there.
Right. Was there any news of the outside world?
Not as far as I know.
Right. But up until that point in time, had you even seen a German soldier, a Nazi soldier?
I have not seen a German soldier, only the Hungarian soldiers.
Right. But you knew that the Hungarians were working in cahoots with
Yes, that we heard. That Germany has been taken over most of the world. They're fighting all over the world. And we knew that the Hungarians are working with them. But the news as far as Jews being killed in Poland or in Germany or in Auschwitz, at least I haven't heard.
So even as late as 1944, you knew nothing about concentration camps?
I didn't know, unless at the age of 14, I didn't know.
It's remarkable. Pretty remarkable.
It is.
Right.
Because, not that I would have done anything about it at that age, but I'm sure some people might have done something.
Right.
Put up some kind of a fight, because there was a lot of people there in that ghetto.
Right. Tell me about your sisters. You had 3 sisters.
Right.
How did they deal with all this?
Very quietly. Really. As a matter of fact, when I talk to them right now, my sisters are alive. They're both older than I am, all 3 older than I am. And we talk about it, and not too often, of course, we don't discuss it, how we just let ourselves be led in all these directions without doing anything about it.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess they were still also young. My sister, my older sister, she was born in 1920, so she was 24 years older. 24. No, sorry, she was born in 1922. She was 22 years old at the time.
Right. So she was already like a young girl.
She was a young girl.
Yeah, right. So describe for me the circumstances surrounding your transportation to Auschwitz.
Okay. We were the second transport, as I said. I don't know how many cars that train had, but it was a long train. There was a lot of people on there. And I remember they just pushed in as many as they could into each wagon. Not only was there no room sitting, but there was no room standing. And on that train, quite a few people died. Suffocated, whatever. There was no sanitary conditions there. There was just that hell I remember at that time, but that was the last. It was crying and screaming, no food. And those trains started moving and didn't stop. It was like endless trains going.
So this was already your third move in as many weeks.
Third move, right.
And the Hungarians just came around Munkac and
Just
gathered everybody?
lined them up, and just so everybody was able to take just a little valise with them, an overnight change. They said, that's all. You'll get everything when you get there.
Right. How long were you in the train before it actually started to go?
Probably a couple hours.
Just standing?
Just standing until they loaded all the trains up.
Right.
And got the permission, I suppose, to start moving.
Right. Was it daylight at this time? Do you remember?
It was towards the evening when we started moving.
Right.
It started boarding sometimes mid-morning, and it was going on all day. And,
But you were still with your family?
Yes, we were all in the same wagon, same train. And I think at that time, most people realized that things were just getting progressively worse, and there's nothing good to look forward to.
There were no rumors that circulated as to where you were going, what was going to be your fate?
If there were, I didn't know.
You didn't know. Do you think your parents knew but kept it from you?
Possibly.
Mm-hmm.
Very possibly, because once we got to Auschwitz, I'd never seen my parents after that.
How long did the train ride take?
Train ride took about 3 days.
3 days.
And we did stop every once in a while at a station, and they would bring in like a few little cups of water for probably 150 people. So
This is still Hungarian
this is still
soldiers?
Hungarian soldiers.
You were not allowed off the train?
No.
For 3 days?
3 days.
Were you standing or sitting?
Well, sometimes if few people that died, people were sitting on top of those people. He was standing, he was leaning one on top of the other. And sometimes if somebody fell down, so one leaned on top of the other. It was like, I don't remember sleeping much on that train that I remember.
Right. Well, your asthma at this point had gone.
Asthma had gone.
Had gone. Like a miracle of sorts.
It had to be a miracle, if nothing else.
Right.
Anyway,
have you ever thought about that?
Yes, I always do.
Perhaps it was like a gift from God to enable you to have the strength.
I always do. As a matter of fact, many times when we talk about these things, talk about asthma, I said, it was amazing that I had asthma up until the age of 14, and all of a sudden it disappeared. And well, doctors say you grow out of it. People grow out of it today. However, this was pretty much a spur of the moment, and it should reoccur again. I talked to the doctor about it. Quite often reoccur again 45 years later. Well, we determined why he came back 45 years later. That's later on I might tell you, because I was exposed to materials that were finished with formaldehyde. And I inhaled a lot of that stuff. And I started getting sick, feeling bad, and not knowing from what. Until subsequently I noticed on the cartons of the material, there was a label, this material was finished with formaldehyde. When I showed that to the doctors, they said, this is what set it up.
Right. But if you would have had asthma in those first few weeks,
I wouldn't have survived.
You wouldn't have survived. You're convinced of that?
I was joking, absolutely.
Right. So you were in this train for 3 days.
3 days.
There must have been mass hysteria. It was your first exposure to probably seeing a dead person.
Absolutely.
Right. Do you remember what it was like to see?
I didn't look.
But you knew there were dead people.
It was there. It was. It's tough. That's why many times, my kids used to ask me why I don't talk about these things. It's difficult to, I suppose, to relive a situation of that sort. Right. So when you start thinking about it, it becomes like reliving the past.
Right. So after 3 days, did you know where you were going?
I didn't.
You didn't know you were going into Poland?
No.
No. You didn't know which direction you were going in?
I had no idea. Nobody was even thinking, looking. Everybody was busy with hysteria.
Right.
And,
when did you know that you were going to Auschwitz?
I didn't until I got off the plane. Off the train, and we saw the signs, Auschwitz. It said Arbeit macht frei.
You saw that. You saw that sign above the gate.
Big signs, and we heard those dogs barking and Germans screaming. It was like, with big lights.
Was it nighttime?
Was
it nighttime when you arrived?
It was evening,
Right.
I had never seen anything like that. Lights and screaming and dogs, and uniforms, German uniforms.
Chimney stacks?
I didn't notice those immediately, but didn't take long. And they opened those doors of the trains. Germans started screaming, "Raus, raus, raus!" And people were falling all over each other with sticks, beating and hitting people, older people falling on top of each other. This was a, sight. And that, I suppose you can, it's impossible to imagine, okay, unless you've been there.
Right. How do you handle it as a 15-year-old?
Well, they made announcements that men and women over 50 on one side, 18 to 50 to move on another side, and children under 18 to go with their mothers.
Was your mother was over 50 at this
My
point?
mother was under 50.
Okay.
So was my father. He was 49. But they made an announcement previously. They said that anybody over 50 will not have to work so hard. They will be given lighter duties. Under 50 will have difficult duties. So my father said he was 50 and wanted lighter duties. Mm. My younger brother went with my mother. I went with the 18-year-olds. I don't know why, because my friends were 18. Mm. I mentioned before I went to school,
right,
skit classes. I said I was 18. Mm. That's why I went to the 18 side.
No, they didn't ask for any type of documentation to verify it. You had nothing with you at that point.
Because they really, I don't think I'd have anything, because whatever my parents took along, at least it wasn't with me, certainly didn't have anything. So I went over the 18-year-old side with my friends that I went to school with.
Right. Were there just thousands and thousands of people on this platform?
It was unbelievable. And that was the last time I saw my parents.
So your parents went together to the line of people under 50?
Over 50.
Oh, they went over 50 to get a line.
And my younger brother went with my mother because he was under 18.
Right.
He was 14, 13.
And you went with the 18-year-olds?
I went with the 18-year-olds.
And did you see your parents marching off?
I saw them go off on that side. And I was with my mother. My mother was crying, screaming. And my sisters went to the younger ones, also 18 and over.
Did you go with your sisters?
No, men on one side, women on the other side.
And you saw your parents marching off. Obviously, you had no idea that you'd never see them again.
No, but they said that you get to see each other once a month or something. They made all kinds of statements.
Right.
And that was the last time I saw them.
And your sisters went to the line with the girls.
Yes.
Were you in eye contact with them?
Just when they left. After that, I didn't see them either.
You didn't see your sisters again either?
Although they remained in Auschwitz for a while, and I remained in Auschwitz for a while, and we never met each other. We never saw each other. And probably, even if we had seen them, we wouldn't recognize each other, because subsequently, once we got those uniforms, those striped uniforms, everybody looked alike. You couldn't tell who was what. I couldn't, unless I was facing my friends. Otherwise, I couldn't recognize them from the distance. It was like you had one uniform.
Right. Were you with anybody? Were you with a friend of yours that you went with
Yes.
this line?
Yes, I was with a couple of my friends.
Who were they?
One was Moses Gottesman, and one was Willie Abraham.
Are they alive today?
They're alive today, so they're here in the United States. I see them quite often.
Okay. Tape number 3. You were just telling me about your arrival at Auschwitz. You saw your parents go off, your sisters go off. You were never to see them again. Where did you go once you got into the camp? What happened to you?
Okay, once we got into the camp and they made that separation, they shoved us all into a special rooms, baths, and they made us take off all our clothing and just to remain with the shoes and suspenders, as I mentioned before. After that, they had barbers there, and they cut everybody's hair, and they shaved like the center of the head to identify us as being prisoners there.
Jewish prisoners or just?
Well, I don't know whether it was Jewish or probably just any prisoners that were in Auschwitz had that shave, the center of their head, a line through from front to back, so that he's recognized as a prisoner. And after we were shaved and given, taken baths or showers, everybody received those striped uniforms with pants, shirt, and hat. And then we were all sent to a barrack. Auschwitz was raining all the time. I remember it was muddy, it was cold. And it was like almost the next day by the time we were finished. It was towards afternoon. I remember we all went into that barrack. And before they sent us into the barrack, everybody received a third of a bread. It was like these little loaves of bread cut in three. And we were sent into the barracks with that bread, and each one got a little cot we had to sleep on.
By yourself, or you had to share the cot with somebody else? Or?
No, each one got a small cot there. It was like a triple decker.
What month of the year was this?
It was probably May.
May 1944.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Did you know at this point, so you'd been in Auschwitz for 24 hours, did you know at this point what Auschwitz was?
I'll tell you, Steve, we were so busy that time with so many things that were pushing us around all over. I didn't think we had a time to think at all as to what's happening. And it was so scared. Everybody was so scared because wherever you moved, you had those dogs, those German shepherds, with Nazis with their leather coats and guns pointed at you. That you were really thinking of one thing. I don't want to get into his hands. That's about it.
Right.
So when they gave us that, we went into that barrack. Within 5 minutes, whistle blows. Everybody out. I left my bread on my bunk there, and I ran out, of course, and they had to count everybody. It's called that a pail, a pell, a German. Count to make sure nobody's missing. That took an hour until everybody was more than an hour standing in the rain. By the time we finished, came back to the place again. My rations were gone. My bread wasn't there no more. My food for the day was gone already.
Someone stole it.
Sure.
Right.
That was my first orientation in Auschwitz.
Right. Survival of the fittest.
Yeah.
Right. Did you realize? Did you have any understanding of how big Auschwitz was, or just at that point nothing?
At that point, nothing.
And at that point as well, you had no idea as to the fate of your parents or sisters.
I had no idea.
Nothing.
The next day, I saw at a distance, because it was very big, Auschwitz. They said that was women on the other part, also wearing same uniforms. It could have been my sisters there, and I couldn't tell whether it was them or it was me.
Right. Were you able, or did you try in any way to get to see them, or you knew it was just impossible?
I didn't know where to go, what to do. I mean, you really couldn't go too far there because you were watched constantly. The only place you could go was you had bathrooms in the middle of the barracks there where you could go. Otherwise, you were limited how far you could go. And at that point, I believe they were deciding what to do with our group, what jobs to send us to. So we were in Auschwitz only about maybe a week or 10 days, myself. But the next day, they called that a pale again. And I think I was scared already that time because I saw the day before they had those, the German shepherd took a bite of one person that was standing in the front in that line. So I think I went into the bathroom hiding. At least that's what must have happened, if I remember. And one person was missing in that line, and that person was me. People were standing in lines an hour longer than they had to, unfortunately, on my account, because I was hiding. Finally, I remember the SS found me in the bathroom, and they brought me out. Now, there's another miracle, because most of the time they would shoot a person like that. They gave me 25 lashes and pushed me back into the line.
Where they give you lashes on your back?
My behind. Pulled my pants down.
With a whip?
With a whip.
I guess the question is, it must have hurt. Something terrible.
It's not a question. I couldn't walk or sit for a week. I had to walk and sit, but it was very, very painful. But were you in? Did they give you any type of medical care after that? Or? No, not medical care. And see, I don't have a number on my hands either.
No.
Most people in Auschwitz got numbers, and it could be only one reason. I must have been hiding when they did that also. Because whenever I had a chance, I mean, I was so scared at that time. That's the time when I really got scared, when I got into that place. That whenever I had a chance, I was hiding in any corner. I was able to not to be visible. So most people had their numbers tattooed on their arms. I didn't have one. My sisters had tattoos.
Right. I know the answer to this question before I even ask it, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What were your feelings at this point towards the Germans? This is your first encounter with the Germans, so you'd really only been with them for 2 or 3 days. How did you feel towards them?
I don't know. I don't think I have to explain that to you. You probably, most people would know how I felt. I was just scared of them. I just would not, whenever I had a chance, I wouldn't be next to them.
Right. But there's a difference between fear and hate, or the two in this situation very much.
I don't know whether there's that much difference between fear and hate. When you fear somebody like that, you hate him just as well.
Right.
But we did not stay there long enough, so the next move was to move from Auschwitz to Mauthausen.
Right.
From the fire to the incinerator.
When did you accept the fact? Was it in Auschwitz where you accepted the fact that your parents had perished?
No, I did not. I didn't know. I knew nothing about. In Auschwitz, I really didn't know yet much about the killings in crematoriums when I was there the first week. I heard people talking about it. Here's where they kill them, and here they burn them. I don't think it penetrated. At that point, I just could not understand it, that or accept it, maybe.
So you were in Auschwitz for a total of?
Maybe 3, 4 days, 5 days at the most.
That's it.
I just didn't penetrate, and probably for a long time it didn't penetrate.
Right. So you were then taken from Auschwitz to Mauthausen.
Yes.
Why were you moved?
Well, not myself. There was a whole big group that started. First we started marching, and marched for days. Probably 30% of us did not survive that march because we did not get any food, and if anybody couldn't keep up with the marching, just shot them on the side and pushed them off into the ditch.
Right.
We got in the middle. Sometimes I ride with some trucks that used to pick us up also and give us a ride for a while, and then march again. But March was like, it was forever.
How far is it from Auschwitz to Mauthausen?
It took us about 3 days, so I imagine it probably maybe 50, 60 kilometers, 70. I'm just guessing because I haven't made that trip again, and I don't think I'd want to make that trip.
Right.
Even on the sightseeing trip, I just have no desire to go back there.
Were you strong? Or
I was very strong at that time.
Yeah.
Strong and scared.
Right.
I don't know how I would explain that best, because I'm a very determined person. When even today, if I want to do something is to be done, I don't give up. I'll make sure it's done.
Right.
So I guess I was determined at that time also to hold out.
So the asthma didn't have an impact.
Asthma had no impact whatsoever.
Right. So you went to Mauthausen. Describe what it was like to arrive in Mauthausen.
Well, when we got to Mauthausen, it seems as though in Mauthausen I found out something else. That not only the Germans are the ones that could be dangerous to your life, to your health, even the prisoners, because they had made some prisoners there as capos, and the leaders of the barracks or whatever it is, and some of these were probably worse than the Germans themselves.
Right.
Some Poles.
Any Jews?
Some Jews.
Right.
And when I came there, that was a place where they were cutting stones and building, I think, Messerschmitt factory. They had one Messerschmitt factory there. Where the prisoners were building underground. So they had all kinds of 3 shifts, 24 hours a day, digging the sand from under the ground and building that underground factory should not be detected, I suppose, by the Allies. So there I found out, as soon as I got there, somebody noticed that I had a pair of good shoes. I still had my shoes from home. So one of the, I think it was a Polish capo, he wants to buy my shoes, exchange it for his shoes, which is wooden shoes. I wouldn't do it. He offered me a slice of bread. I still wouldn't do it because shoes were very important. Then he found a way to persuade me. He persuaded me by beating the hell out of me and taking the shoes away for nothing. And then I found out and I wound up with a pair of wooden shoes. So I found things are not going to get much better here. They're going to get worse.
Right. How long were you in Mauthausen for altogether?
In Mauthausen, we were only, again, just a few days. And we were sent to a camp called Gusen.
Right.
It was a Gusen 1 and Gusen 2.
Right.
Subsequently, I wound up in Gusen 2, where I spent most of my time.
Right. What? In Mauthausen, you were only there for a few days, and Auschwitz you were only there for a few days.
Right. I was still in transit.
Right. So during the day in these two camps, what did you do? Just nothing?
Well, no. In Mauthausen, we were sent out to do work already. Even when we were there, sent out to carry stones from the area,
From the quarries.
out, and we were working already.
Right.
They made us move a lot of things.
Right.
So there we put in a day's work already.
Right. And within the space of 2 weeks, you had already been beaten twice.
Well, I suppose for me it was a novelty. They told me there, some of the people, this is a regular occurrence, they said. This is, I understand, and I was told by some people already that this is just the beginning. Things are not going to get any better. And some of the people were there for a long time because subsequently I found out that from Poland they'd started moving Jewish people to Auschwitz and Mauthausen in 39, 40, 41. So this has been going on there for a long time.
Right.
So those are the people that, the percentage that survived was small.
Right.
And apparently they felt that the newcomers that came wouldn't even be able to last that long because they saw that they were not the strong ones, like they considered themselves the strong ones. The Czechoslovakian, the Hungarian Jews were supposed to have been the weaklings.
Right. So you went from Mauthausen to
Gusen 1.
Gusen. And how long were you in Gusen 1 for?
Gusen 1 again, just a few days.
Right.
That was also just a transit.
Right.
And,
were you still with these two friends of
yes,
yours?
Yes.
Right. So you were like the three of you together. Right. Did you?
There were some others from the town also, but these two were my close friends.
Right.
But there were some more people
Right.
from the same town.
Had their parents and siblings had also been taken away?
One of the fellows had his father with him. He came with him. He was a younger guy.
Right.
And he subsequently died in Gusen too.
Right. How did you cope without your family, emotionally?
It was very difficult. Every night I would probably cry myself to sleep. And it was not only parents, it was rough. I was beaten, I didn't have any food. You know, many times I felt like giving up because all you had to do was give up and finish, but then the next morning I was ready to fight again.
Right.
Fight for survival.
Yeah. I know that this was still early, I mean,
Yes.
in terms of your whole camp experience, but was there any talk of developing some type of resistance or? No.
There's no way of, not once you're inside. There's not, because every place first of all, the whole camp was surrounded with electrified barbed wire.
This is in Gusen?
Every one of them
Right.
electrified, so you couldn't even come close, so there's no way of out. And in Gusen 1, Gusen 2, as a matter of fact, at Gusen 2, once we got there, a lot of people that got tired and just walked over to the electrified wires and
Threw themselves on the wall.
yeah.
Right.
First of all, there were guards all around, and if anybody came close to the wire, they would shoot them anyway.
Right.
But you throw yourself at the wire. I mean, this was a normal occurrence.
Right. So once you were moved from Gusen 1 to Gusen 2,
And we came in there, and that was supposedly our permanent place. They told us, here's where we'll stay, and here we'll have to work.
what type of camp was it?
It was a camp with like an army barracks.
Big, small?
Big. It was a big camp. It was probably, they must have had there maybe 10,000 inmates.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember who the commandant of the camp was?
I don't remember his name anymore. The fat German who the scream.
You remember his face?
I remember his face. I remember he showed the first day we came. He lined up a whole line of people, and he wanted to see how many he could shoot with one bullet. Just went right through.
You saw that?
Yeah, and he, well, by then I had gotten used to dead bodies, and I've seen a lot of them. And he would laugh, and he'd say if anybody tried something, this is what he would do.
Did you understand German?
Well, I understand Yiddish, so German and Yiddish I would understand. As a matter of fact, towards the end I got to speak it fluently.
Mm. Your parents spoke Yiddish at home?
Yeah.
What did you do in Gusen? Were you assigned to work?
Yes. Guzin, we also had the same bunkers that they used to build. I think there was also a Messerschmitt factory. It's Messerschmitt, the airplanes that they were building underneath. There's a lot of hills there. There was the mountains, and they used to build these factories under the mountain. I remember it was like a short distance ride from the camp to the mountain. They would take us by open train. Every 8 hours there was a shift going. And they would have those German shepherds in each corner of the train, in each car, watching everybody. And many times these German shepherds used to take a bite just at random at people. That used to scare me to no end. Fortunately, I never got bit by one. But it was a sight, you know, to see an animal just jump at them. And they would let them just jump at random because those trains were filled up pretty much. There was no room to have a stand, no room to hide. And I was at that time, I was 15 years old. And, I was supposed to be 18. I used to shovel with those, work on those, shovel that sand out of there and put it on conveyor belts. That conveyor belt's taking it all out. And if you stopped, those dogs used to bark at you. They were already trained, but you had to keep going.
What time did you start in the morning?
Well, I used to have 3 shifts. I used to change shifts 1 week. Work from 6 to 2, from 2 to 10, I think, and then it was from 10 to 2. It was constant shifts, so they used to change. Because it was cold in the wintertime there. We had no clothing. It used to freeze here.
You were still wearing the same striped uniform
Yes.
as UBG?
Wooden shoes. Well, it seems like every shift they had to get new people because some died.
Right.
I don't believe maybe 25% of them survived. That's the end by 1945.
Right. So you basically went from Guzin to your place of work, and back to Guzin.
That's correct.
And just back and forth. And what did you do when you went back to the camp? Were you just collapsed?
Well, the collapse used to get once a week. They used to take us to a bath to get rid of because everybody was infested with lice and all kinds of things. Once a week, and yet they had chores. They made you clean the barracks and do a lot of things around the barracks. They didn't let you do much. They didn't let you sit still.
Right. What was the longest amount of time you were given to sleep at night?
Probably 4 or 5 hours if you slept.
Right. Would they wake you up for a
Sure.
roll call in the middle of the night?
Anytime. Used to do that quite often. This was a habit they had gotten into. And they used to make a roll call every time before any shift went out, just in case somebody's missing, so they would take from the rollout people to fill in the transport. And so maybe 7, 8 months into that work, while I was working there, I think I had gotten enough already also, and I was getting tired. So when the night transport was supposed to go out, I was supposed to be in it. I made myself fall down, and I fell on the floor. And once you fall on the floor, they take you out. You don't go in the transport no more. Well, what happens after that? Usually, you're finished. They take you away. But I was fortunate. My 2 friends, as I fell down, they grabbed me, and they brought me into the barrack. Before the Germans had a chance to see that I was out of there, they brought me into the barrack and hit me. And I was out of that one shift. Once I was out of that shift, usually took a little time before you get into another shift. And by then I was so weak already and small. I didn't look like an 18-year-old boy anymore. Then the chef from the kitchen who used to cook whatever we used to get came around looking for, I called them coal bunkers, people that would put the coal into the kettle there where we used to cook, fill up the ovens with coal. And I volunteered for that. He was supposed to be the youngest that he was looking for the youngest kids to do that. He was a German, also a prisoner. So I volunteered because I may have been taller than some of the kids. And he gave me a slap in the face that I thought I was going to, I didn't know what was happening. But then when I fell down, he says, okay, come on. And the next couple of months, I worked in the kitchen. And there at least, I was able to get a little extra food. And that time I remember my two friends who used to be there, because I wasn't allowed to give anything to anybody out of the kitchen. But I saw some people were taking things and throwing at people. So I remember taking out potatoes and throwing at them. They would pick it up. I still remember that. And they would pick it up and have extra food. They'd come around every day. Right. I'd take stuff and throw at them.
Right. You obviously were raised in an Orthodox home.
Yes.
Right. Jewishly, what were you able to do, if anything, in the camps?
I hate to admit I did absolutely nothing. To the contrary, towards the end I got to the point where I almost didn't believe in anything. And truthfully, I hear people saying they did a lot of things in camp, maybe the older ones. I haven't seen anybody in my camp doing anything. And we've had some rabbis there. They were rabbis. And I guess there was no feelings towards religion at that time. At least I didn't.
Right.
Must say.
Okay. I'm interviewing Mr. Aaron Jacoby. This is tape number 4. You were describing the work you were doing in Guzman 2. You were there for a total of
8 months.
8
9
months.
months.
Now, Guzman 2 was principally a labor camp.
Yes.
Right. Had you come to the realization that at this point your parents had probably perished, your family had probably perished, or you still?
Well, I thought of it, we talked about it, but we still did not believe it. By the way, Guzman 2 was not only a camp for Jews. In Guzman 2, we also had prisoners of war from the Soviet Union, Poland, German prisoners of war. I mean, Germans prisoners who probably were against the regime. And of course, all those had extras when it came to get food, special foods, or anything like that. Jews never received the same thing that they did. Jews were the ones that were on the lowest level.
The lowest level of the totem pole.
Yeah, so even they could order the Jews around to do things for them if they wanted to.
Right. Were there any guards that you remember as being particularly brutal?
Well, I can remember one guard that was particularly nice to me. He was not a Nazi, he was a Wehrmacht. And he stayed for a short while. He must have done that to other people, to other Jews also. Therefore, they must have gotten rid of him. Because I remember towards the beginning, maybe when I got to Gusen too, the first month or so, he just pulled me over once on the side and he says to me, why are you in prison? I mean, as a young kid, are you against the regime? Why would you be in prison? So I told him I really didn't know. So the next morning, every morning he would bring a slice of bread and look around and throw it on the floor for me and give it to me. And he's done that for a short while, but then they disappeared. They got rid of him. I don't know whether somebody noticed it of the SS or whatever, and I hadn't seen him. That one, I remember he was, I guess it was some Germans that did not realize how bad the situation was also, even the German force. As far as the bad ones are concerned, yes, there used to be some, towards the end, they spoke Russian. They were probably from that joined the SS in the Ukraine or wherever they came from, but they were Russians, and they wore the SS uniform, and they were the worst. To them, it meant nothing killing a person. It was as though it was doing it for pleasure. But there was no shortage of atrocities.
Yeah. But for the last few months in Gusen, was it fair to say that working in the kitchen?
Working in the kitchen was a little bit easier.
Right.
Of course, I worked harder than any place else, but at least it wasn't cold on the outside. It wasn't freezing, and had that additional food, and I was able to help some of my friends also a little bit.
And that's really all that mattered, just to be able to survive in a matter of a little bit.
And unfortunately, that lasted a short while, and then it came towards when the American armies were beginning to, that was early 45. By the time we're getting towards 45 already, the Allied armies are beginning to close in already on the Germans.
Now, did you know anything of what was happening in the outside world? That there were Allied advances? That the Russians
the only time we knew is when we heard sirens going, and towards the early part of 45, we started hearing sirens, and we felt that someplace they're being bombed. So the talk started going that maybe the war is not going so well for the Germans anymore, because you saw a lot of movements of soldiers, changing of soldiers. They used to, at one time, they brought in to the kitchen where I was there, bombed out horses, and they used the horse meat for food. So we were thinking, how can there must be someplace close already that they're being bombed, because it must have been a stable someplace bombed.
Did you see the Allied planes?
No.
Oh, no.
Not at that point yet, no.
Right. But from Gusen, you had one more stop.
Then that was just towards the end already. I think that probably was in the end of March or early April that they started dismantling Gusen 2. Started sending people out, sending groups to, which we weren't aware of. That was the death march already. They were sending us to Gunskirchen, subsequently found out. And that was about a day and a half's walk also.
Could you spell that for me? Guensker.
C-H-E-N.
Gundskirchen.
I think it's spelled it right.
And Gundskirchen was a concentration camp.
That was already not a war camp. That was a death camp.
Right.
There was no work being done there. That place was so muddy that if you got your feet in, you couldn't get out of it. There was no barracks anymore. It was just like a big farm that had nothing on it.
Where did you sleep?
On the ground, wherever you could. There was no sleeping no more. There was no food anymore. I think what they gave you that there was a half a cup of black coffee and one thin slice of bread for the daily ration. And at that time I was so sick already that after a while I couldn't swallow that bread anymore. They used to exchange it give it away for for that half a cup of coffee. Somebody had 2 slices of bread and I had 2 cups of coffee.
What were you sick with?
I don't know, just couldn't move, just weak. And there, every step, you saw dead people. There was dead people all over already. The ground was covered with dead people.
You were forced to march from
Gusen
to
Gundskirchen, yeah. The one thing I skipped there in Gusen too, there on the daily events, every time you get up in the morning, you'd come out and you saw piles of bodies. I'm talking about piles. Hundreds and hundreds of people died every night. How and what, we didn't know. But there, some of the people I knew, quite a few of them that had died there.
Was disease a big problem?
I guess everything was a problem. People were, well, it had to be diseased because everybody was infested with lice and no food and cold. It was like a daily occurrence, and you'd go out and just see if you knew somebody. I guess it was shown in the movies at times, but nothing of that. Bodies, and then there was people just worked to take them into the crematoriums, guns and burnings. We had a crematorium there also. So when we got to Gundskirchen already, I mean, it was nothing new. You saw bodies on the floor. And, people used to sit down, and if you could sit down and rest, that person didn't do anything no more. And that was the place where we're supposed to be finished. Fortunately, one afternoon, we realized that gods are disappearing. Not that we looked at them anymore, it didn't make any difference. But all of a sudden, we saw there's no gods there. So people started getting up and looking around and seeing what was happening. There's no gods. A few hours later, the American army came in.
What had you been doing in Gundskirchen for the 3 weeks?
Nothing.
Just
moving or sitting around doing nothing.
All day. Waiting for...
Whatever happened.
You didn't even know what you were waiting for.
But that's... when the American army drove in, I don't remember moving away. I couldn't move. So...
What was the date? Do you remember?
Yeah, that was May 5th, 1945.
Do you remember what it was like to see Allied soldiers?
You know, I was in a daze. I just saw a star, you know, but it was like seeing stars. It was
almost like an apparition. You were 16 years old.
It was like seeing a soldier that you're not afraid of.
Right. You were 16 years old. Your childhood basically had disappeared. Where were you taken?
I wasn't taken any place because I couldn't move. They started giving out food, chocolates. I couldn't eat it. And unfortunately, whatever they did that time, they meant to do well, but it wasn't so good. They gave people food. Most of those people died after that.
Right.
See, I remember asking for water. That's what I get. In 52 days, I believe, my two friends who are here are the ones who had watched over me. I was just lying and drinking water.
Mm. Your three sisters. Did you know where they were?
No, not yet.
Did you know they were alive?
Yeah.
No. Okay. So after the Americans liberated.
After they liberated, then of course after 2 days we started moving around. We started walking. Came into town to Linz. The Americans had set up there a hospitals and.
Where was this?
In Linz.
Can you spell
Linz, L-I-N-T-Z, Germany. That's Austria.
Right.
And somehow or other, everybody started fending for themselves. We started looking around and organizing food to go into the German homes, and we took some stuff from the Germans because they were readily willing to give things, whatever we wanted at that point. So we had food, and we were just trying to figure out what was happening. My two friends were a little older. They knew a little more how to organize. But we would just spend days and days of walking around, realizing, just getting used to freedom.
So at that point you knew already that the war was over?
Yes.
Where did you stay at night?
We they set up a like a
like a BP camp?
A camp, sort of big houses there where anybody wanted could come in and spend the night there.
Right.
And then, of course, the food was available. They also started registering everybody every survivor.
Mm.
They set up offices where asked every survivor to come and register, give their name, where they're from, where they were, their numbers that they had, and they checked that with the German records. They kept good records.
Right. How long were you in this area for?
Not too long, maybe 5-6 weeks.
And then where did you go from there?
Okay, then we decided we wanted to go home to see whether anybody else survived. How else? Figured everybody would be going back home to the hometown where I was born and meet there. So while we were on the German side, on the American side, we were treated well wherever we wanted to go. They used to give us rides with the jeeps and trucks. And to go back to where I was born, I was on the Russian side. Czechoslovakia was under the Russian side. So I remember we had with us American cigarettes, chocolates, and they gave us clothing. And they brought us by truck to the Russian border. Get off the Russian border, we figured, we'll get the same treatment. Instead, the Russians took everything away. And they, no trucks, walk. Well, we walked for a while, but there was trains going. The trains those days in Europe were unbelievable. There was no schedule. There was no room on the train. There was no conductors. Nobody was taking any tickets. It was just traveling.
Just a free-for-all.
Free-for-all. People were riding on top of the train, on the steps. Well, anyway, I made my way by train to back to Rakowitz. When I came back, my middle sister was there, Rita, number 3, child number 3. She was there, and quite a few other people were back already from town.
Was she in your parents' old home?
No, their homes were all vandalized, brutalized. There wasn't that many of us left. There was, in the middle of the town, there were some Jewish big homes. One home I remember people owned had the bar and grill was in their home. It was a large, large home. So we settled all in that particular home at that time. everybody, whoever came back, that's where they stayed. And of course we were happy to see. And my sister had met somebody from the same town, and she decided she wanted to get married. So I remember I was the one that gave her away. Before the rest of them, two more sisters came home a little while later. The oldest and the next to the youngest.
Right.
And we were, four of us came back. And subsequently we found out that was all that was left.
How did you find out? Or you didn't find out exactly?
Well, we found out as to what happened to the older people in Auschwitz, so we know what happened to our parents. Because people came back from Auschwitz, also some who worked in those crematoriums who knew exactly what was happening. So we knew exactly that the next day they got there, the ones that went to the left, the 50 and over, and children under 18 were put to death almost immediately. And subsequently, another fellow who was with my brother in that labor camp told us that he perished. And that was it.
How long did you stay in your hometown for?
I didn't stay too long because I was very edgy. I decided to travel, go to Prague, Czechoslovakia, because I wanted to get away from that area. It was just
too many bad memories.
Too many bad memories. So I went there, and I stayed there for a while. I didn't have any money, so of course I started doing some business. There was no cigarettes available those days. I didn't smoke, but I knew it was a good market for cigarettes, so I used to go to Budapest and buy cigarettes there, American cigarettes. They were available there somehow. I don't know how I found it. Truthfully, things were just happening. And I would buy suitcases of cigarettes there and take them to Prague and sell them there and make a profit.
But you were only 16, 17 years old.
That's right.
Where did you live? Did you have any family in these places?
No.
Where did you live?
Wherever.
Where did you stay?
Just any place.
Wherever you could find a room and board.
Wherever I could stay. Most of the time on train stations also. But it was, a lot of people stayed at train stations those days. It was nothing. It was just people just kept traveling constantly.
Right. How did you feel? I mean, the war had finished. You were 16 years old. You now basically had to fend for yourself. You had no one really to turn to for assistance or support. I mean, how do you get by?
Well, I'll tell you, maybe I felt responsible that time already for my sisters. I just felt that I was the one that survived, and I had to make just do something.
You knew that it was time you had to start supporting yourself and making a living, almost. Right.
That's not true. Could I get a glass of water?
But as far as your education, that had finished. Basically.
Well, at that point, yeah, that was finished. At least I wasn't thinking of education at that particular point. But I did that for a while, and I had made some money. And I go back and forth. I went back to Rakowitz to see my my families who were there, my sisters. My oldest, one of my sisters, of course, was married, and she had set up already a household there. She went back into my parents' home, and she had set up a household there. And then things were getting tight again. The borders were beginning to close up. And I figured, thank you, I would make a couple more trips so I can have some money and get everybody out of there, because I didn't want them to stay on the Russian side, because I saw already at that point what the Russians were like and what the other side was like, what Czechoslovakia or the American side.
Mm.
And as a matter of fact, it's funny, I remember the last trip I made with those cigarettes. And of course, I didn't speak Hungarian. I just smoked it, met there with some Jews, and I bought the stuff, and then I took it to Prague. I get off the station in Prague with 2 big valises, and I still don't let anybody get off the train. Police surrounded the train, and nobody gets off. They're checking everything. Here I am sitting with 2 valises of American cigarettes.
Was that a problem?
Sure. Smuggling. It wasn't,
Oh.
it wasn't permissible to sell American cigarettes. So here I am, 16 years old, a kid. I take those 2 valises and I walk directly at a policeman. He says, "Can you tell me how to get to that particular street?" He looks at me and he points that way, and I just kept walking.
You just kept on walking. Uh-huh. So you were now, you had really set yourself up in Prague.
I set myself in Prague, and I met some other people there in Prague, and we went to the Sudetenland from Prague. You know where Sudetenland is?
Right.
And there was Germans that lived there at the time, but all the Czechoslovakian people were getting rid of them. It's like the Israelis did to some of the Arabs. The only difference is that here they make a lot of noise in Israel, but in Czechoslovakia it was a natural thing. You can just go over to any farmer or any person that's of German descent that lived in the Sudeten, tell him pack your things and go to Germany. And he had to do it. There was no questions asked, and a Czechoslovakian person or even a survivor was able to take over his place.
Really? How long were you there in the Sudetenland for?
In the Sudetenland, I was there from, say, 1946, at the end of 45, really, to 1947.
And you involved yourself in this?
We also got involved in that. We took over one of these farms, because I was the youngest, and of course I was not a partner, just was able to stay there. Mm-hmm. But then I went back to try to get my sisters out. And that was towards the last minute, because that was in 1946, the end of 45. The borders were closing up, and I was afraid I'll remain there. So, and I had also an uncle there, and of course my brother-in-law and my 3 sisters. So when I got back there towards the end, my younger sister had left already. She went to Germany. She went to Germany, not to Czechoslovakia. She went with a young fellow also who she married subsequently. And my older sister was still there. So we packed up, including my uncle, my sister, and a couple of other people that I talked them into leaving, going back to Czechoslovakia from the Russian side, because Russia annexed that area after 1945. It became Russia. My sister who got married, though, my brother-in-law didn't want to leave. He said we should go first and then he'll come later. So they did not come, and subsequently they remained there until 1960. Mm. Anyway, they all came out. We went out at a very difficult way because the borders were closed. We had to travel through Romania. We were caught a couple of times and sent back. It was like going over borders illegally. But subsequently we made it, and we lived in, my younger sister lived in Germany, and my one sister lived in Czechoslovakia with me. She subsequently got married there also. And the one sister lived in Russia until 1960. Hmm.
How long did you stay in the Sudan?
1970. So 1970. And the Sudan I stayed until 47.
47, you said.
But then in 1947, something came over me that I wanted to go back to school, learn. So it was actually in 1946 I started already. I went to Prague, and I started going back to school. I was able to get free tuition, and I did get a part-time job as a plumber's helper to help myself out. So I went to the University of Prague for a while. I also went in the summertime to Marienbad. Do you ever hear of Marienbad? That's also in a resort area in Czechoslovakia. They had opened up a yeshiva there. Rabbi Forhunt, I still remember his name, and had a free yeshiva for survivors to go to yeshiva.
Yeah.
And so I went to yeshiva, I went to school. Things started coming back again. I wanted to learn again. I took English, and I became a functioning person again. Started doing some business in there for survival because I had to support myself all this time. And of course, we had a lot of family in the United States. My mother's family was in the United States from late 1800s. My sister had the address, and we started corresponding. And they sent us papers. And we had to get on the Czechoslovakian quota to get a visa to come to the United States. So in 1948, first my sister got a visa with her husband, and I got a visa. Mine was a little bit delayed because I was getting towards the age where I was supposed to go into the Army, and it was pretty difficult to buy my way out of that one, but I did. And then in 1949 we all came to the United States.
Okay.